You are now tuning in to the story of Blue Moon of Ake by iCreateStories.com. Created and narrated by Dala Dala. Is Badi. In 10,000 BC in West Inki, known as today's Africa, the horizon was filled with stone temples smothered in darkness, and the nights were drowned by whispered silent pleas. It was a wicked place, no place for the innocent. The smell of evil and a cold, detached aura clouded Queen Jinabadi's black kingdom. The goddess queen was a fierce, demanding beauty, with long braids and dark fair skin. Badi's blue eyes seemed to pierce through the souls of her subjects. She always dressed in black, dripping in the purest gold, and walked as if she were floating. Her markings on her body told a story of cruelty and vengeance, of conquering and victory, and on her arm she wore a bracelet engraved with a glowing blue gem. Her deep, hypnotizing accent gave a person chills up their spine when she spoke, and if she yelled in anger, the sound shivered the very walls around her. The people of the kingdom were lucky they rarely saw her, and she didn't speak much. However, she enjoyed the company of her tall, spotted feline, Rube, who had golden eyes. Badi spent most of her days sleeping and her nights reaping or warding energy from the moon. Outsiders and her many enemies throughout the lands of Enki questioned how she became such a cruel woman. She had a bitter disposition and no compassion for the weak, while displaying pure animosity towards the strong. No subjects could question her authority or dare try to reason with her without lethal punishment, death. Although the queen was cold, powerful, and mysterious, no one could deny she was captivating. She walked throughout her kingdom surrounded by a brutal army close to 300. Her army was the most destructible walking force known to mankind. Her warriors possessed strength and power unseen before. The devilish men had once lived as ordinary humans until they were bound by her spells and transformed into giants, with piercing muscles flexing through their armor. With their magical strength, they built her kingdom from the ruins of another, and now protected her and her gloomy territory with heavy swords. There in her kingdom they marched and they waited for instructions, always ready for war. But only fools waged war with the queen. Most people knew not to even try, for they knew she was no ordinary woman. They had heard the stories of her past victories, stories of her using unexplainable forces to annihilate people or scare them into shock, stories of her controlling the earth beneath people's feet, magically lifting them into the air and tossing them around like leaves. Stories of dark magic power that should not have been possible that lived within the goddess. So for many years the people kept their distance from her wicked domain, and the queen kept to the walls of her temple, but she did not wander the rooms wasting time. No, she was always planning. There were more lands outside her territory to conquer, more power to seize. She wanted to control everything within her grasp, all of it. Only then would she be truly happy. Now, with her giant warriors behind her, there was nothing left to stop her. The easy takedown. Her first target was the nearby densely populated city of Tuk. The night of her invasion, the queen watched from the distance on a small sandhill. Her blue eyes peeked out through her black head wrapping as she looked down upon her brutal men trampling their way through Tuk, easily cutting down the young defenders. The boys dropped dead on the streets like flies, and Badi's monsters pressed onward. Within minutes, the king of Tuk was surrounded and begging for his life. He had two choices: declare his city handed over to Queen Badi or die. After a bloody encounter, there were less than half of his faithful defenders left, who watched helpless, scared, and confused as Badi slowly entered the bloody scene herself, her dress sweeping behind her to listen for the right answer. However, the king refused. With a single flick of her hand, she signaled one of her men to put a sword through him. The king toppled over, dead. A burst of yells went forth, angry cries from the remaining survivors. But before any of the king's men could charge at Badi's warriors, a blast of powerful light blinded and forced the men to their knees. When the light faded, there the queen stood with bright blue eyes and her bracelet lit to the sky. In a deep, demanding voice, she spoke. "Come now, I am your queen, and you will obey my wishes or die just like your dead king." Only a few challenged her again, but they were swiftly brought down. The weak ones who remained put their heads to the ground, trembling, bowing before their new queen. The next city to fall was Damun. This time, the king and the queen of Damun were killed in the midst of the fighting, and hundreds of more civilians fell before the city surrendered. When it was finished, Badi enslaved every surviving man from both Damun and Tuk for her army, forcing them to comply with her orders. Through her dark magic, they were transformed into deadly weapons. These helpless souls tried to fight their way out of their new machine-like bodies, but there was no way out, and they feared for the lives of their wives and children they had to leave behind. The takedowns of the two cities not only fed Badi's army, but also contribute large amounts of gold, precious assets, and other attractive luxuries to her kingdom's hold. Now, with her armed forces close to 500 strong, she turned her eyes to a much bigger kingdom south of hers that had long seemed too large for her to conquer, but now seemed an easy target. The Tai Sword Kingdom ruled by King Tai. To her, King Tai was too weak of a king to possess such a place. She considered sending out a warning to him first, giving him one chance to surrender his kingdom without a fight in exchange for a nice settlement of diamonds, gold, and his life. Yes, she decided she would offer him this one chance, and if he denied her, she would show him the full power of her force. Her message went out by carrier the next day, across the plains and fields from soldier to advisor, and eventually in the hands of King Tai, as he stretched back upon a lounge chair watching three pretty women dance seductively before him. He'd always been one for the ladies, and those close to him knew he had a lot of them. He enjoyed using his charm, his looks, and his attractive singing voice to lure women in. When his advisor handed him the letter from the queen, he read it once and laughed aloud, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. He had a vast kingdom and over 1,000 armed warriors. He had never heard of Badi, but what ruler could possibly stand against him? His royal pride clouded his judgment, indeed, and a week passed only silence for the queen. One night, while lying in bed, daydreaming of the kingdom she would soon possess, Badi summoned her general, a 6-foot-tall, well-built man with a bald head and many body markings. "Yes, my queen. Send one more message to King Tai. Tell him this is the last time I will wait patiently for his response." "Of course, my queen," he said, bowing before her. She dismissed him and soon fell asleep with a smile upon her face. Her general left that night for the Tai Sword Kingdom and reached it 2 days hence. From a hilltop, the land of the temples, statues, and stone palaces stretched before him. At the gates of the king's palace, he was greeted by armed men. "I have a message for the king," said the general, and handed over a scroll of writing before turning away to leave. This time, the queen's warning struck a nerve in King Tai. How dare this woman threaten him like this? Appalled and furious, he sent out spies to find out more about her. He stood out on the balcony of his palace as a dozen of his men rode off on horses to follow behind her general. "My king, I'm sure it's nothing to worry about," said his advisor beside him. "Shut up and go. Do not return to me until you are certain." replied the king before stalking away. A few nights later, the queen was outside strolling through the trees on the outskirts of her kingdom, absorbing energy from the moon. From a distance, she spotted men moving through the darkness and moving things around. Her glowing eyes narrowed. Something told her these were not her men. These were King Ty's men, camped outside her kingdom spying. Rising up into the air, she floated toward them like a giant raven in the night, descending upon them until she was right in their midst. The men shrieked and stumbled over each other when they saw her, pale-faced and terrified.
Go, tell your king he is no longer,
Said Badi, her voice echoing through the clearing.
I am your ruler now.
When she finished speaking, she disappeared, leaving the spooked men trembling and fleeing for their lives. The king's frightened men went straight to an advisor once they reached home. The advisor nodded solemnly and went to tell the king the bad news. Two women were sleeping outside his room. He yelled at them to leave and knocked on the door, and the third woman slipped outside when the door opened.
Can I come in, your majesty?
Asked the worried advisor in a shaky voice.
Yes, he replied.
The advisor entered the room to find the king still getting dressed, facing the other way. I trust you have news for me, asked the king.
Yes, your majesty. There is indeed a queen named Badi, Badi. She is on the other side of the sea, and what?
The king said.
It is said she destroyed both Tuk and Moon.
The king spun around with his chest puffed out, seething.
So this is a serious problem. I haven't heard anything about a Queen Badi until now. What is all this craziness? She is no ordinary woman, explained the advisor. She possesses magic. Magic?
The king snorted at that.
No such thing. I have the biggest and strongest army in Ake. No fake magic can touch us. She can send all the threats she wants. She will not destroy my kingdom, and we will be prepared if she comes this way. Your Majesty, you must understand.
The king and his advisor argued for hours, but eventually the king came to believe this Queen Badi was a powerful leader. She was not just a woman. According to the advisor's outside sources, she was a deity with magical powers, and other rumors had it she was a witch of some sort, both vicious and controlling. She was not a threat to be treated lightly. The queen commanded powerful forces of her own, and she desired above all things to be the only ruler of all the lands within her reach. She felt that King Tai didn't deserve all that was lying at his feet, and his kingdom was close enough for grabs. She attempted to persuade him to step down first to lessen the casualties, but he refused in his foolishness. He'd waited too long to make his reply, and now she was on her way and would forcefully take his kingdom for herself, killing him in the process. Tai was in a rage, hearing all of this. He did not possess magical powers like she did, but he came from a bloodline of strong ancient warriors, and he commanded men who were human fighting machines. Let the queen come for him. He will kill her first and bring her to her knees. But when the king finally calmed down that night, he realized he could not do this alone. He was going up against something he did not understand. If she had magic, he needed to find some magic of his own. The next day, he sought out help from his advisor and was directed to a local man who told him about a suspicious witch doctor the people believed was a hidden sorcerer. No one knew a great deal about this man, but there were many speculations that he was a person who could cast spells and had some sort of illuminating powers. This was a secretive man who hid out in the mountains and never showed himself. After some investigating of the man's whereabouts, King Tai set out to reach him personally. He rode out with a few protectors on huge horses and reached the desert mountains at sunset. After finally reaching the remote area where the man was believed to reside, they found themselves in a discreet darkness with nothing in sight for miles. The king cautiously approached the place with his armed men surrounding him, carefully making his way up a narrow pathway on a hill. He found the road came to an end. The king started to worry and second-guess his trip. As he started to turn back, there was a great scraping sound and a hidden door opened in the mountain before him. The king looked back to see the light of a flame blocking the face of a tall person. "I'm looking for a man named Ilnulu," said the king. "Are you him?" The man didn't answer right away. Slowly, he lowered the burning torch down and away from his face, and Ty's eyes widened in awe. "I am Inulu," said the dark, mysterious man with noticeable gashes on his face. The king cleared his throat and lifted his head. "I am King Tai, and I'm in need of your help, and I am willing to offer a substantial reward for it." "No, I cannot help you," Inulu snapped back. "Leave now." The king ignored him. "I need your help. My kingdom may be in danger, and whatever the price is to get your help, I will pay." Inulu stood there with narrow eyes, clearly not amused at all by who King Tai was or what he wanted. He moved a step back into the darkness and shut the door in the king's face. "Wait," said the king desperately. "If you help us kill Queen Badi, I will give you anything you request. Anything." The man paused and closed the door. "Jinabadi?" he repeated in his deep voice with a frowned upon face. "Yes, Queen Jinabadi. Do you know about her? Do you possess powers to help me defeat her?" the king asked curiously. Inulu smirked for a long moment. When he finally spoke again, it was in the softest murmur of a voice. "If I help you in killing her, I don't want any pay from you. I want her kingdom." The king growled in frustration. "Why would you want her kingdom? I can't agree with that. Her kingdom will be mine when she is dead." "Then I cannot help you," said Inulu. The king was so angry, he left without saying another word. This is not a game. Across the land, Queen Badi was not wasting any more time. She wanted Ty's kingdom promptly. So one evening during a full moon, she gathered her army of men before her. Jinabadi's insane soldiers stood in formation in front of her temple. She stepped out the entryway, looking captivated, dressed in all black, her hair pinned up, her gold jewelry glistening on her fingers, and her eyes beaming blue. She then lifted her head up to the night sky and started to levitate and speak in an unknown tongue. A bright blue light began to cover her men, and they grew a little bit bigger in size, their muscles and weapons gearing up for the fight. Dropping back to the ground, she looked with glee upon her creatures. "You will go now and cease and take King Ty's kingdom. When you have finished, bring the foolish king to me." As the wind roared around her, her warriors marched and rode off on horses to the Seal River that divided the north of Inki from the south. They took the shortest route to the south, cutting across the river to make better time. When they got there, Badi was standing near the river with her eyes glowing towards the moon. She maneuvered the water to manipulate the flow, creating a dense, shallow opening. Hundreds of her men jumped in and walked through the water to the other side. However, the queen just simply floated over them, leading her men right towards the Tysore kingdom. It was a long, misty night with a full moon hiding behind the clouds, and King Tai was sound asleep, not knowing the vicious invasion was coming. But his men were startled awake when the ground began to shake as Badi's army approached, grappling through the sandy land. From a distance, the king's advisor could see Badi gliding before warriors over the shimmering land, leading her monsters under the black sky. The king was lying in a bed with two women when his advisor rushed in. "We are under attack! Queen Jinabadi is coming!" he yelled. Tai, startled awake, jumped up and hurried to put on clothes and rushed out the room. Now the king stood near the outer part of his kingdom on open land with close to 1,000 men behind him. About a half a mile ahead, he could see Queen Jinabadi and her army closing in quick. "Prepare for attack!" King Tai ordered his men with a shout. They readied their weapons, swords, bows, and fire, and waited idle on their horses. Suddenly, the queen magically appeared about 20 feet away from the king. She stood there evil but beautiful, and the king stared in awe, mesmerized by her beauty. She spoke. King Tai, step down now or I will destroy your whole kingdom. This snapped the king out of his reverie and made him grind his teeth in anger. He shouted the order for his men to attack her, but she disappeared again in a flash, and Badi's men rushed towards Tysor, making the ground unsteady. Ty's fearless warriors tense, prepared for war. Shots were fired and arrows flew straight at Badi's men, but they bounced off their armored chests and arms. Some of Ty's soldiers rushed in on horses, but her warriors shoved the horses to the ground and sliced into the men. Swords clashed against the giants' weapons. And the clang reverberated throughout the land. Queen Badi's army easily blocked and tossed and cut into their flesh. A few of the men were able to cut up some of her monsters, but not enough to cause massive damage. About 100 of Badi's men held off in the back on horses, with bows and arrows at ready. They waited until she appeared and they whipped out their arrows. She magically lit the arrows with blue flames as they anchored through the air. Then stood back with a smile and watched the arrows set Ty's man on fire. Again they reloaded. Again she lit up the arrows, killing more and more men, her smile growing ever wider. All the destruction was a game for the queen. King Tai watched anxiously on his horse as hundreds of his men fell, while her man barely scratched. Fire! He shouted, but the arrows his men shot failed harmlessly. Badi's warriors were still rushing forward. He ground his teeth again, contemplating what to do next, how to break this witch's power. You must leave now, King, urged Ty's advisor nearby on a pacing horse. Go now! No, I will stay and fight, said the king, then cried out as a man on one of the horses beside him tumbled over dead, an arrow in his side. The queen was sending the arrows in his direction now, much too close for comfort. Arrows glazed right over the king's head as he tried to move backward. And before he knew it, there were flames everywhere. Her archers were too accurate. No matter how far they had to aim, nothing was getting through those warriors' armor. Yet still, he didn't give the order for retreat. His fearful men kept rushing forward to make another go at the enemy, only to find himself trapped in Badi's circle of death. She would float around their heads and blast them with blue fire, setting them up in flames, crackling over their richest screams. Ty's man fought with unbelievable might and heart, but it was not enough. It took at least 20 men alone to stand up and barely scratch one of Badi's giants. Ty's kingdom was going up in flames. This was way out of control. They had to retreat. Pull back, the king shouted. Pull back! As the flames kept raging around him, a few of his protectors tried to help him away to safety. He was in a desperate and hurt state from some of those flames catching on his uniform, but he was able to flee, and he decided in that moment he would head back to Inulu and beg him for help again. He didn't know what else to do. He had lost everything. Badi ordered her man to destroy his kingdom and take everything of value, and Queen saw Ty's men as asset too. As they fled for their lives, many of them failing to get anywhere at all, the queen rose up into the air above the bloody scene. Her eyes lit up to the sky and her bracelet beamed bright, and she floated above their heads. She slowly raised her hands into a rotating gesture and jerked them back. Suddenly, an immense light showered the men, blinding them to the point that the last of the fighting halted. She shouted before speaking in an unknown language. The light surrounding her slowly faded away, showcasing a floating Badi in her glowing eyes. Ty's confused men dropped their weapons and stared up at her as she turned and floated away. All the battered and bruised men, still standing, followed her away from the burning kingdom. The power of attraction. There seemed to be nothing that could stop the queen, and she knew it. It gave her deep satisfaction knowing she was the top ruler throughout Anki now. But she still knew there was more out there, and her greed was becoming unsustainable. Meanwhile, King Tai was determined not to let her get away with what she'd done. So, there in an upset, desperate state, he pleaded with Inulu to help him get rid of Jinabadi for what she had done and for who she was. "What could you possibly offer me now?" asked Inulu dryly. "Your kingdom is over, and she now has everything. If you help me, I can get everything back. I can give you whatever it is that you—" "Oh, shut up, fool," Inulu rudely interrupted. "Look, I will help you get your revenge on her, but you must follow and do everything that I tell you." With that, Inulu stood up, grabbed a full jug, and poured some of whatever was inside it into a cup for the king. "Thirsty? Here, let's drink to a victory that will soon be ours," he said. The king took a sip and then questioned, "How will we defeat her? You, King Tai, are a nice-looking man. Don't you think so?" The king smiled with arrogance. "Couldn't agree more. Well, now you'll be irresistible," Inulu said with a smirk as he held up a small empty tube. "You have just drunk my best potion, spell that took me years to develop." The king looked both confused and interested. "The queen is heavily protected and too hard for me to get close to," Inulu continued. "But you, with your irresistible charm and undeniable physical appearance, made even stronger by my potion, you can get close to her. You can manipulate and seduce her until she is weak in her infatuation with you. You will have to get close enough to her and bring me back a strand of her hair to make my spell work. Then I will be able to get closer and kill her. You should know, however, she is more powerful at night. Do you agree?" "No," Tai brutally said, his curiosity replaced by anger. "She will kill me as soon as she sees me. This is a death sentence." Inulu shrugged. "If you want my help, you don't have any choice. You must go and do this or we shall forget all of it. And you will not get any justice for what she has done to you. Only magic can defeat magic, and what you have now is magic. It will be hard for her to want to kill you, and if you play the part, she will fall into the trap." The king slowly, hesitantly agreed. Tai wasn't sure exactly what spell Inulu had put on him, or if it would even work, but he desperately wanted Badi gone, and was there really anything else to lose? "Okay," he said. "I will do it." "Perfect." Inulu clapped his hands together. "Lie low here for a few weeks, and then you can go work your magic." After weeks of much contemplating, they came up with a plan Tai felt would work to his advantage, and he headed out to face his sworn enemy. On his way to Badi, Tai stopped first at his demolished kingdom. He made his way through the burnt bones and ashes among the sand, the decaying bodies. One he feared was his old advisor among them, and the rage filled him. The bodies littered the floors of his palace as well, even his empty rooms of riches. And there he decided he would stop at nothing to take the queen down. Tai reached Jenabadi's kingdom a few days later at sunset. The closer he drew to her temple, the more his energy started to change, shifting from anger to festering worry. But there was no going back for him. There was nothing for him to go back to. At the entrance of her temple, 4 enormous soldiers stood guard. Before Tai could come too close, he jumped off his horse with his hands up to display no threat. But it did no good. Badi's men quickly rounded him up like a piece of meat and brought him inside, despite his protests. He was taken to the general and dropped on the ground, and a huge sword was drawn to his head. Wait, please don't kill me," Tai said quickly. I come with peace offering for the queen. The general just pressed the blade of the sword closer to Tai's neck, drawing a small drop of blood. Please, cried Tai. What do we have here? Said a voice. The queen. She strode over with soft footsteps, a big feline hissing and pacing beside her. She can smell your fear, said Badi with a sly smile. Please, queen, give me a chance to explain why I'm here, said Tai. I bring no threat, she laughed. There's nothing you can do for me. I think you would be better off dead. Most beautiful queen of Inky, please give me a chance to make it right with you, he continued. I have nothing and nowhere to go. She didn't say anything in reply, just stood there smiling at him in a way that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Stand, she suddenly shouted. The general pulled his sword away slowly, giving King Tai room to rise unsteadily to his feet. He was taller than Badi by at least a foot and looked down at her until she levitated to his height and their eyes met. The king was momentarily stunned by her blue eyes and pretty face. Wow, he murmured. Take him away and lock him up, she snapped back. Her man grabbed him and dragged him down the hallway to be locked up in a confined room. The queen's feline followed behind her as she stalked away without a word, her train whipping behind her. The next day, the queen was lying in her bed, awake, staring off in a daze. She then sent for a general. Yes, my queen, he said when he came in. What is there in all of Inky I should take now? She said. Well, you have conquered the greatest, and you are now queen of the strongest kingdom in all of Inky. I'm not sure what else there is for you to have, the general responded hesitantly. There is something else, something I have missed, the queen said. I can feel it, but I don't know what it is yet. The queen turned over and soon fell asleep, and the general left. Several hours later, after day had turned into night, the queen was awake again, taking her normal stroll through her kingdom before heading out into the open sand fields. She walked the sands at a slow pace, lost deep in thought. Suddenly, she stopped, looking up at the moon, and her eyes brightened. She took a moment to listen to the soft voice playing inside her head. The most beautiful queen of Enki. It was Ty's voice she was pondering on, those oh so lovely words that made her feel something she never felt before. Badi swiftly returned to her temple, passing through the halls by the locked room that held King Tai. She walked slowly past it, uncertainly, but continued on to her throne and took a seat. Her huge cat Rube came and laid her head on her lap, and Badi stroked the feline's fur, lightly tapping her foot on the ground. It wasn't long before Badi got up and went back to the door of the king's cell. She walked right up to the closed door and stared at it for a long time. Suddenly, Tai spoke out. Hello? Anybody? Hello? Queen Janabadi vanished into the shadows of the hallway, leaving the corridor empty. Anybody there? The Player's Game. For some reason, the words Tai said would not be put to rest, and she kept feeling a gravitational pull towards him, sometimes finding herself walking past his room where he was held captive. Meanwhile, the king sat in his locked room, hoping the queen would let him out or at least talk to him. After a time of trying to fight the unexplained magnetic attraction, the queen decided to see what it might bring. 2 nights after the king had come to her kingdom, she sat at a table with an empty chair on the other side. Her cat lays peaceful on the floor nearby, and candles lit up the decorated room. She sat there with her hair down, dressed in a revealing black outfit. The night felt different for the queen. She looked different too, warm and inviting. She called for the general and said to him, Have Tai groomed and brought to me? Yes, my queen, Shortly thereafter, the general and another soldier led King Tai into the room where Badi was waiting. She dismissed them with a wave of her hand. They left the king standing there clean and dressed in fresh apparel. He wore a tunic that revealed his chest and muscular arms. His beard had been cleaned and groomed. The queen quickly took notice of his handsomeness. "Have a seat," she said. Tai sat in the other chair staring at Badi. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Before he could answer, food was delivered and placed in front of him. His eyes got big as he stared in obvious hunger at the delicious food. The night started off weird and quiet as the two sat across from each other, both waiting for the other to start a conversation. Tai hadn't been certain he would ever be set free, let alone sitting in the presence of strange, unmatched power. He didn't know what to do or what to say to such a beautiful but evil woman. In a low but clearly charming voice, he said, "You look beautiful tonight." "Eat," she responded. The king started to eat, and after a minute he looked at the queen. She sat there staring at him quietly, eyeing him down as if he had stolen something from her. "So, why are you really here?" she said. "To be part of your life. If you will let me." The king looked at her, trapped in her beauty. "You are so gorgeous. I don't know whether to run to or away from such beauty. Do you not know who I am and what I am capable of doing?" But he asked, half amused and half wary of his words. "I do, and I'm willing to take that risk. You took everything I had from me, and I will admit I am still hurt. But you didn't take away the one thing that has been missing in my life, and that's a queen," he told her softly, with a serious, passionate look. The queen sat there quietly for once in her life, not knowing what to say. She knew her beauty could be mesmerizing and relished that look in the king's eyes, but the feeling behind his words was unfamiliar and strange. The king looked down at all the delicious food on the table. He asked Badi if she was going to eat, but she didn't respond. He sensed she was lost in her head, confused about the current situation, so he decided to try lightening the mood. He started to sing a little. His soulful voice was really playing at the queen's heartstrings. Tai then stood up humming and approached her slowly, looking deep into her blue eyes, by noting out of the corner of his eye that her feline was close at hand. King Tai sang in a sultry, inviting voice, and his words made the queen feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. She was enamored by him against her better will, and the closer he drew to her, the more her heart beat recklessly in her chest. Just as he got close enough to grab her hand, she wrenched her hand away and stood up boldly, and like that, she vanished from the room. The king stood there blinking in confusion. No woman had ever denied his advances like this before, but of course, the queen was no ordinary woman. Two soldiers came in to remove him and lock him back up. It was a night of pure confusion for the both of them. Tai sat in his dark, small, confined room thinking how strange it was that he wasn't as afraid of her as he expected, and wondering how he could break down the wall between them. Buddy sat in her room wondering why she wasn't so eager to kill him and be done already. What made this man so intriguing? She didn't want to fall for this king who was beneath her in power, if not in looks, but her efforts weren't strong enough to resist his play. After 2 days of trying to avoid the king's charming presence, she stood in her huge bedroom window under the moon, a calm breeze rustling her hair, lost in her revolving thoughts. Candles were lit near her bed, letting off a sweet aroma. She called for a man to get tied, clean, and brought to her. When they did so, she stood with her back facing him and said, "I am not sure why I'm into you 1 minute, then I'm thinking about killing you the next." He walked over to her, anxious to touch her, but hesitant to set her off again. "I have never had these feelings before," she continued. King Tai slowly drew close to her and gently touched her long, loose, wavy hair. Badi closed her eyes and sucked in a deep breath, then opened them. "I could never hurt anyone as beautiful as you," he said as he put his body close to her back, close enough she could feel his heartbeat. "Just let me love you," he said before moving her hair to the side and kissing her on her neck. Buddy closed her eyes again, taken over by his warm breath on her neck and his soft lips planting kisses on her skin and his strong hands caressing her breasts. Suddenly, he turned her around and pressed his lips against hers. Soon, they were both kissing each other with heavy heartbeats, and then Ty lifted her up and carried her over to her bed. A strong wind blew through her window, putting out the candles surrounding her bed. There in the dark under the moonlight, the two made lustful love. The Player. The next morning, King Tai lay beside the evil queen in her bed while she was sound asleep and marveled at how he charmed his way into this. He sat up staring in amazement at how beautiful and peaceful she looked, just laying there. Not too long ago, she was a killing junkie, and now she lay there like she wouldn't hurt a fly. He got up and walked over to the window, running his hands through his hair, a turmoil of feelings inside him. Then he walked back over and got back in the bed. He softly caressed her face. His eyes caught the hairbrush on her bedside table just before her eyes fluttered open. "You still here?" she said sleepily. "Good morning, beautiful," he responded. "Good morning. Should I have you locked back up?" she asked with a grin. He smiled. "No, I promise to behave." He pulled her into him and started kissing her, but he soon fell back to sleep. Tai slipped away and asked her general to deliver food and flowers to surprise Badi. After a while, Tai woke Badi again with a kiss on her forehead and flowers in his hand. "Wake, my sleeping beauty, we have food waiting," he said with a smile. The queen, who was not used to being up so early in the day, sat up with a tired look and a warm smile. "Flowers for me?" She grabbed them from Tai. She sat there a little surprised and overwhelmed. Then she got up and walked over to the table with her flowers. "Wow," she said. "I asked the general to bring your favorite thing to eat," Tai said. On the table was some sweet fruit, tea, and bread with honey. She sat down at the table and she started to eat happily, still holding her flowers. Tai stood up and walked over to Badi. "Here, let me put your flowers over here." He took her flowers and put them in a metal container and added water to them. "They're pretty," Badi said. "I'm glad you like them." Tai started humming and singing little tunes as she ate her breakfast. All of a sudden, the queen started to hum back a little in a strong, sultry tone. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "You can sing, Badi?" "Call me a Badi. There's a lot you don't know, Tai," she said with a smirk. "Please, tell me more." Badi studied him for a moment with her blue eyes. "It's not like me to let any man sit here freely with me. But there is something about you, and I need to know why. Why did you come to me?" He hesitated. "Honestly, I'm still trying to figure that out." Badi frowned at that. "All I know is I have strong feelings for you. The first time I saw you, I was amazed. I'm still astounded by your presence," he quickly said. He held his head down as if he were sad and said, "It's true. You destroyed everything I had, and now I have nothing. I really don't know what to do. If it makes you feel better, I will leave." The queen kept studying him closely, searching for a lie in his eyes, but he looked and sounded genuine. At first, the queen had been certain he wanted something from her and was out to get her because she had taken everything he had. But there was no sign of deceit in him now, and she definitely couldn't explain the strong feeling she had for him. No matter that hint of weariness still in her heart, she didn't want him to leave. She stood up and took Ty's hand and walked him over to a huge carved out window overlooking her enormous kingdom. "You can stay here with me," she said, "and share all of this with me." He looked out her window and admired the view. "I cannot take back everything I've done, but as you can see, here it is more than anything you could ask for," she said. He stood there smiling, shocked that Badi would say this to him. "You will share everything you have with me?" he asked. "Yes,
As long as you don't try to hurt me, you will be happy here with me, Badi said. Hurt you? I will never hurt you, he said before passionately kissing her. King Tai continued to charm her with lies, manipulating her into thinking he would never hurt her. He explained how badly he was attracted to her powerful essence and how he wished they had a better first introduction. So many thoughts were rambling in Badi's mind. Was it love she was feeling for King Tai or the satisfaction of admiration for being worshipped in a loving way? Regardless, she liked how he was talking and she was willing to take a chance on him. Though if he ever turned his back on her, she would show him how much he truly had to fear. The power of love. King Tai didn't possess magic like the queen, but he had an unbeatable magical charm and he knew how to please her in ways that kept her attention. Badi was soaking it all in and falling more into Tai's web of love. He seduced her on a daily and made her feel like the only woman in the world. Days went by and they grew closer and closer, to the point one afternoon, Tai felt bold enough to express his concerns about her rulership. As they lay together on a chaise in her room, he asked her, "Why, Badi? Why control all these men inside and out? How can they truly worship you faithfully if they're under a magic spell?" Badi had been petting her feline, but now she paused. "I don't need anyone to love me," she said stiffly. "Just to do as I say." Tai frowned a little. "Is that how you feel about me? I know you're not a truly evil person. Somewhere inside of you, a river of love is wanting to flow." Buddy sat upright, then pulling away from Tai, her eyes got brighter and narrowed at him. "This is my kingdom. Who are you to question me?" "Buddy, I thought what? I love you, so you can tell me what to do?" "I am a goddess and I don't need anybody." Buddy stood up suddenly from the chase, held her hand out, and with a flick of her fingers, magically lifted Tai up into the air. He did his best not to panic, but he couldn't help the nerves rushing through him. "I am Queen Jenabadi, Ashafa Tuklu Chochila, Queen of Inki," she proclaimed. "I love no one. But I love you, Badi," Tai said, failing unsteadily in the midair. Jenabadi's eyes dimmed. She dropped him. He landed on the chase with a cry, and then she disappeared. Tai struggled to his feet with a shocked face. Then his shock turned into cold anger. The queen didn't love him. She hadn't changed at all. Had all the feelings he'd sensed from her been a lie? He was a foolish man to have believed otherwise. He took one glance at the doorway behind him to make sure no one had come in and strode over to her bedside table where a hairbrush lay. Grabbing a clump of hair out of it, he clenched it in his fist and rushed out of the room for the stables. It was time to return to Inulu, and none of the queen's guardsmen stopped him as he rode off on his horse, because he was a free man in her kingdom. When Badi returned to her room a short while later, Tai was gone and nowhere to be found. With a sad little sigh, she went to take a seat on her throne, her cat rubbed against her leg, purring. "Rube, I didn't mean it," she softly confessed to her cat. "But now he may never come back." As King Tai traveled into the desert mountains, he started to feel deep, overwhelming emotions that he couldn't explain. Anger? Yes, but also confusion and heartache and love. He truly did love the queen. He couldn't deny it. But she denied him, so his feelings meant nothing. This had been a ruse all along, and it was time to finish what he set out to do. When he knocked on Inulu's front door, a voice beckoned him inside. He walked in to see Inulu eating at his table. "You still alive?" Inulu said, with a mild surprise in his voice. "And you made it back." "Yes, and I have what you need." Tai held out the clump of Badi's hair. Inulu took it from him with a wicked smile and sniffed it in a way that didn't quite sit well with Tai.
Then he stood and walked over to put the hair inside a little glass jar, which he set on a shelf. "Wonderful," he said. "So what do you plan to do with it?" asked Tai. "We are going to make her pay." Inulu turned to Tai and his smile faded. "Well, what's wrong? You don't look happy. Now I'll be able to kill her. You will have revenge and I will have her riches." He continued and smiled again. "Nothing's wrong," said Tai, trying to act nonchalant, though deep inside his turmoil was rising up again. "Yes, it will be perfect. Now you will go back and wait for me. I will be there after tomorrow and you will have to sneak me in," Inulu told him. "What?" Tai said. "I can't go back there. You must. You need to keep her distracted." Tai began to pace across the room. He fled with the sole intention of never seeing Badi again. Inulu would kill her and be done with it. Now he was supposed to go back and face her? There was no telling what she would do to him with her bipolar ways. "I may not live to see another day with that crazy woman." "I will work my spell and she will become weak soon and you won't have anything to worry about," Inulu assured him. The king shook his head, but Inulu was insistent. There was no other way. If Tai still wanted his revenge, and he did, didn't he? So soon enough, he set out for Badi's kingdom again. A few nights later, there were soft footsteps behind Badi as she stood in her bedroom looking out her window. She sensed him before he even stepped into the room. "You came back?" she asked with her back turned. Tai stood there not knowing what to expect with a clump of purple flowers in hand that he picked on his way there. "Yes, and..." Before he could finish, she turned around and rushed in to kiss him. Tai dropped the flowers, caught up with a rush of desire for her, and put his hands on her cheeks and kissed her back. "I'm sorry, Tai, for what I did," she said as his kisses trailed down her neck. "I forgive you," Tai breathed. "No, really, you should never hurt someone you love." Tai paused from kissing her and looked down into her serious eyes. "You love me?" he asked. "Yes. Did you mean it when you said you love me?" she said softly. Tai hesitated, then he smiled at her. "Yes." Badi looked at him and took his hand. "I want to show you something." She led him out of the room, out of the temple, and they got on a horse. They rode out to a secluded area up a small mountain. Then they dismounted and walked up the mountain until they reached a high point and a closed-off cave. The queen magically removed the covering from the cave and led Tai inside. The place was full of shiny crystals, engraved writings and symbols covering the walls. Crystal blue water trickled in a huge pond that filled much of the cave. "What is this place?" asked Tai. His eyes were wide in awe. "It's very beautiful and comforting. This was my home, my first home. I haven't been here in a long time." "Wow, amazing. You are the first person I have ever let see this place. I used to come here to gather myself and find peace, but after a while, I forgot about wanting peace." The queen stood over the blue water in her black outfit, the water glistening in her eyes. For the first time, the king saw her as a different, peaceful, loving, and caring person. He reached out to take her hand, and suddenly the water swirled beneath their feet, revealing the image of a beautiful woman dressed in white, smiling and laughing. It was Badi. I wasn't always evil," she said, looking down into the water. "I don't know why a little broken heart changed me, but he did. I guess because he was my first love and all I knew was him. I gave him everything he asked for, even powers, only to find out he was only using me, trying to control me, and he was in love with another woman." The water suddenly turned dark and the picture of the once peaceful Badi disappeared. "I left them both dead, and I think I left a part of me there too, Tai. I turned bitter, cruel, lonely, and all I wanted was to cause pain for everyone else. But I wasn't always this way." She turned to him with wide, almost pleading eyes. "I understand," Tai said with sympathy. "I knew you had love in you all along. I have done some evil things, but being with you has started to show me how to feel again," Badi said. "I promise I will never love again, but I am healing."
So a broken heart brought you to the point of killing and trying to take over Enki? Yes, and after he killed the only person who raised me and loved me, I lost love for everything, Badi said with grief. Tai stepped closer to her. Badi, you are so powerful and beautiful. I hope I can finally witness the old true love in you. I promise to change and do better. Will you give me a chance to show you who I used to be and can be? She asked. Tai wrapped his arms around Badi and hugged her, telling her yes, he would. This time he meant his yes with all his heart. He was starting to see a side of Badi he could truly fall in love with. There in the secret cave, they started kissing, and Tai slowly undressed Badi until they were making love to the sound of the trickling pond. It's payback time. The next day, Tai lay in Badi's bed resting, half asleep. He turned over to feel that Badi was no longer beside him. He jumped up looking for her. There over in the doorway she stood in all white, brushing her hair, with one hand hidden behind her back. Good morning, my king, she smiled. Wow, good morning, he smiled back. Her big cat Rube walked in and rubbed against Badi's leg, then went and lay down at the foot of the bed. I think she likes you too, Badi says. She slowly pulled her hand from behind her back and Tai's eyes got wider. She held out a stunning gold necklace with a big diamond elephant charm on it. My necklace, Tai said. Yes, I have all of your riches waiting for you in the other room. Badi walked over to him and she helped him clasp the necklace around his neck. After she was done, he turned around and grabbed her hands and he kissed her. I will find a way to fix everything, I promise, she said as she looked into his eyes. As he leaned in to kiss her again, she suddenly fell weak in his arms. He barely managed to catch her before she hit the floor. Badi! Badi! Badi, stay with me! Tai cried out as he clutched her in his arms. She slowly opened her eyes, weak and heavy. Sweat formed on her forehead and her arms hung loose. Hang on, I've got you. Tai carefully lifted her up and carried her over to her bed. He swallowed the hard lump of guilt in his throat, fully aware of what was happening. This was Inulu's spell. It was starting to work. This was all wrong. He should never have left, never taken her hair to Inulu. He didn't want anything to happen to Badi now, but Inulu was already on his way, and once he arrived there, he would attempt to take her life. She would be too weak to stop him. Tai propped Badi up on a pillow and ran to get a cold fabric to put on her head. He then paced beside her bed, panicking inside. What have I done? He whispered. He decided to send for help, and soon the general came in. I think the queen is sick. Is there anybody that can come and look at her? The general shook his head, starting with confusion at the queen lying limply in her bed. No one here at the temple, he said. The queen is sick? How can that be? Okay, I'm going to find help, Tai said. He went over and kissed Badi on the forehead before leaving. His search turned out to be useless. Not only could he not find help, he couldn't find anyone who would dare come near her. Back at the temple, he returned to the bedroom to find her still weak in bed. He sat down at her side and rubbed her hair, feeling useless while she lay there sick and powerless. He wondered if he could take back everything he had done, but he knew it was too late. Night soon came and Tai still lay by her side, hoping she would get better. While he lay there, the moon's bright light shined into her room and over her. He noticed Badi's bracelet started to glow, and as it glowed, Badi would breathe harder. Sometimes she would move around in her deep sleep. Tai's eyes widened in amazement, and he wondered what was happening. Was the moon healing her? He hoped so. He needed her to get better. By morning, she didn't look quite as pale and lifeless as she had the day before, but she was still too weak to keep her eyes open for more than a few moments.
Tai decided to get up and stay on watch for Inulu to keep him away for as long as possible. He warned the general and guardsmen there might be intruders trying to get in to harm the queen since she was sick. Around midday, Tai was glancing out the window of Badi's room when he saw guardsmen looking unsettled and moving about in a hurry, like they were searching for someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Tai started pacing back and forth like a worried child. A short while later, all of a sudden there was an explosion somewhere in the temple that shook the walls and the foundations. The guards outside Badi's room shouted and left their posts to find the source of the explosion, while Tai ran outside the room to see what was happening, only to run right into Inulu. He wore a dark hood and a scarf covering his face, leaving only his eyes showing. The explosion had been his work, Tai realized, a diversion to distract the guards. "How did you get in here?" asked Tai. "I have my ways," Inulu said slyly. "Where is she?" "She's laying down," Tai answered. Inulu's eyes shifted past him to the doorway of Badi's room. "Perfect. Let's finish this," he said, starting to walk past the king. Tai stood there thinking frantically of a way to stop Inulu without revealing his emotions for the queen. I think we should wait. Try another day," said Tai. "She's not weak enough." "No, today is the day. I know she is weak enough," Inulu said as he reached the doorway. "I can feel her weakness." Tai hurried to block his path. Inulu paused, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing? Move out of my way," he snapped at Tai and pushed him forcefully aside and entered the room. The king panicked and yelled, "No, I can't let you do this." Queen Jinabadi lifted her head up, still weak but looking confused as to what was going on. Inulu approached her bed slowly, lowering his hood, unwrapping the scarf around his head. Now uncovered and visible for her to see, her eyes widened when she recognized his face. "No, listen," yelled the king. In anger and weakness, she mumbled, "What is this? Why are you here? I thought I killed you." "Shouldn't you address me as King Jinabadi?" She slowly lifts herself up and out of the bed, then immediately hunched over. You are not my king." King Tai stared at the both of them as the realization dawned on him of who Inulu was, why he wanted Badi dead. He was the lover who had used her, scorned her, wronged her. Oh, I'm sorry, Badi. Please forgive me for what I have done," said Tai. She shook her head in hurt and confusion. "What? Why? How could you do this? Tai? I thought you loved me," she cried out in tears. I do, Badi, I do, and—" "Shut up, you stupid fool," cut in Inulu. "You can never be in love with a lying witch. She will never love you. She will trick you like she tricked me." Inulu held up a magical wand and pointed it at Badi and struck her with a magical force that started zapping her energy. Over to the side, her pet cat Rube stood on all fours, hissing and growling. Suddenly, Rube attacked Inulu by jumping and biting his arm. Inulu tried shaking Rube off, but he couldn't and lost his striking connection to the queen as she fell back, weak again. Inulu then aimed the wand at Rube and blasted the cat off his arm. Badi's cat fell to the floor, dead. Inulu regained his composure and put his focus back on the queen. He lifted his arm to zap her again, and it would kill her this time, Tai was certain. Without any hesitation, the king jumped in front of the queen, trying to protect her from Inulu and his powers. When the powerful blast came, it struck Tai instead. He died instantly. The queen sat up screaming faintly with hurt. "No!" she sobbed. "Tai!" Then her bright blue eyes narrowed at Inulu and she started to glow. Flying sparks flew all around her, temporarily blinding him as he lifted his arm again. He staggered backward, clutching at his eyes. When the smoky bright scene cleared and he looked up again, the queen had vanished. Inulu stumbled over to where she had been standing and yelled in rage and disappointment. "No! No! I will find you, Jinabadi!" Lost Soul. Sirens rang along with hundreds of cars and truck noises traveling down nearby blocks on the city streets. Two young guys were running down a dark alley.
Come on, man, we gotta hurry for them niggas catch us. What the? Dude, look over there.
Both of them stopped in their tracks. Ahead of them in the alley, a body was laying face down. One of the guys slowly took a step closer. His eyes widened at the sight of the woman dressed in all white, fine clothing and very fine jewelry. She looked like she'd fallen straight out of another world. The guy gently turned her over on her backside.
I think she dead, man.
Not caring at all, he started to strip her of her jewelry, some of her rings and bracelets. But he struggled to take her gold bracelet with the round blue gem off. It wouldn't budge. Suddenly, her fingers twitched and a moan escaped the woman's mouth.
Shit,
Said the guy, stumbling backwards in panic.
she's not dead.
Then the body's glowing blue eyes opened and met his. Cursing, both guys immediately turned and ran off, looking terrified for their lives. She watched them run away as she struggled to sit up, confused about where she was and who she was as she took in the alley around her. To be continued. Thank you for listening to the story of Blue Moon of Ake. To find out more, please visit icreatestories.com. That's an E, not an I. You can also support the creator by subscribing or following on Instagram at iCreateStories. Until part 2, happy listenings and good vibes.